Welcome to the Quiz Fix. I'm Cyril, and joining me as always is Olivia. Each week we dig into one real story from history, science or culture, and we close every episode with a quiz to make sure it sticks. Let's get into it. When people hear the words Boston police strike, they often think, wait, police can strike? And in 1919, that question landed with a very loud, very messy answer.
Exactly. The Boston police strike was a huge labour dispute, but it was also a public safety crisis, a political showdown, and a national headline all at once. It happened in September 1919, right in the middle of a country already rattled by inflation, labour unrest, and fears of social upheaval after World War I.
And that timing matters. The United States in 1919 was dealing with demobilization, returning veterans, wage pressure, and a wave of strikes across industries. Workers in steel, coal, longshore work, and other sectors were demanding better pay and working conditions. The Boston police were part of that larger labor movement, even if their jobs made the public react differently.
Right. Police were not just another union story in the eyes of the public. They were the people expected to keep order. So when they walked off the job, many people saw it as an abandonment of civic duty. But the strike did not come out of nowhere. The immediate issue was that Boston police officers were working very long hours for relatively low pay, and many of them were not even paid enough to keep up with rising living costs.
That's a key point. Inflation after the war had eaten into wages across the country. Police officers in Boston were expected to do a dangerous, exhausting job, often with little rest and limited equipment. They also wanted recognition from a union affiliated with the American Federation of Labor, which was a major demand because it meant collective bargaining power.
Their organisation had roots in the Boston Social Club, which was basically a police labour association. The officers wanted the right to affiliate with the AFL and negotiate over wages and conditions. Boston's police commissioner at the time, Edwin Upton Curtis, refused to allow that. He thought police unionisation would undermine discipline and make the force less reliable.
Curtis had a point that many city officials and editors of the time agreed with, but the officers saw it differently. They argued that if they were expected to protect the city, they needed decent compensation and humane working conditions. Their complaints included low pay, long shifts, and poor treatment by management. In that sense, it was a classic labor dispute.
Then came the spark. On September 9th, 1919, Boston police officers went on strike. At first, the city tried to treat it as a manageable disruption. But the number of officers who walked off the job was so large that the police presence in the city collapsed almost immediately.
And that collapse was dramatic. Without regular police on the streets, Boston saw looting, broken windows, rioting, and widespread disorder in some neighborhoods. Reports from the time describe crowds taking advantage of the absence of law enforcement. The city's sense of normal life fell apart fast.
To be fair, not every part of Boston turned into chaos. Historical accounts show that the worst disorder was concentrated in certain areas. But the overall impression was alarming enough that the city and the nation treated it as a serious emergency.
Governor Calvin Coolidge stepped into the story in a huge way. At the time, he was governor of Massachusetts, and he became famous nationally because of his response. Coolidge called out the state militia to restore order and made clear that, in his view, the police had no right to strike against the public safety.
Coolidge's message became one of the most quoted lines from the whole episode. He said, in effect, that there is no right to strike against the public safety by anybody, anywhere, any time. That phrase helped make him a national figure. It also fed a larger political mood that was very hostile to labour unrest in 1919.
The state replaced the striking officers with new recruits and militia members, and the strike collapsed within days. The city moved quickly to restore order, but the human consequences for the officers were severe. Most of the striking police were fired and were not allowed to return to their jobs.
That's one of the reasons the strike became such a landmark labour story. In many strikes, workers eventually win some concessions or at least return after negotiations. Here, the public backlash was so strong that the strikers lost their jobs almost completely. The city treated the strike not as a bargaining tactic, but as a breach of trust.
And the public reaction was not just local. Newspapers across the country framed the strike as proof that labor unrest had gone too far. Remember, this was the era of the first Red Scare, when fears of socialism and radicalism were spreading. A police strike in a major American city fit neatly into that atmosphere of anxiety.
That's important because the Boston strike became about more than wages and hours. It got pulled into a national argument about loyalty, order, and whether unions had too much power. The fact that the strikers were police made it especially potent. If even the police were striking, some people asked, what was the country coming to?
Still, it's worth separating emotion from history. The officers' grievances were real. They were underpaid, overworked, and trying to organize like workers in many other fields. The question was not whether they had complaints. It was whether the choice to strike was politically and socially survivable for a police force.
And in Boston in 1919, the answer was clearly no. The strike had immediate consequences for labour policy and for the idea of police unions. In the short term, it made public officials much more determined to keep police and other essential public workers from striking.
It also boosted Coolidge's career. His hard line turned him into a national conservative hero of sorts. That helped pave the way for his rise in Republican politics, eventually leading to the vice presidency and then the presidency after Warren G. Harding died in office.
The strike also had a chilling effect on police labour organising for decades. In many places, police unions existed later, but they operated in a much more constrained environment. The Boston event became a cautionary tale, often cited whenever police labour rights came up.
Another reason this story matters is that it shows how public sympathy can shift depending on the occupation involved. In many labor disputes, workers can win public support by pointing to low wages and harsh conditions. But when the work involves law enforcement, the public often expects sacrifice as part of the job.
That's a really interesting tension. Police officers were workers, but they were also agents of the state. That dual role made their strike politically explosive. People could understand low pay, but they had a hard time forgiving a stoppage that left cities unprotected.
And Boston was the perfect setting for this conflict, because it was a city with deep ethnic divisions, political machines, and a history of labor activism. The police force itself was made up of men from different backgrounds, and many felt they had legitimate reasons to push back against the system.
At the same time, city leaders were worried about maintaining authority. In the post-war period, urban governments across the country were under pressure to keep order and resist anything that looked like radicalism. The Boston police strike became a symbol of that struggle over who controlled the city.
There's also the practical question of how the strike ended. It ended not through compromise, but through replacement. The state's use of the militia showed that officials believed they could not negotiate with the strikers without rewarding a dangerous precedent.
That decision sent a message. Some jobs were being treated as too essential to permit a strike. Whether people agree with that or not, it changed labour expectations around public safety work. It also marked a major defeat for organised labour during that period.
What's striking, if you'll pardon the pun, is how quickly the event hardened into a moral lesson in the public imagination. For many Americans, the takeaway was simple. Police should not strike, and city governments must hold the line. But history is usually messier than the slogan.
Exactly. The slogan captures the outcome, but not the full story. The officers were not striking because they were trying to create chaos for its own sake. They were responding to genuine workplace grievances. The tragedy is that their method of protest collided with the public's expectation that police remain on duty no matter what.
And once the strike turned into disorder in the streets, public sympathy evaporated. The image of broken glass, looting, and armed militia mattered a lot. Even people who supported labor generally were likely to draw the line when the streets became unsafe.
This is why the Boston police strike is still taught as a major event in both labour history and political history. It is a case study in how rights, responsibilities, and public trust can collide. It also shows how one local dispute can shape national political careers and public attitudes for years.
And if you zoom out, it's a reminder that the labor movement in the United States was never just about factories and mines. It included public employees too, even when their right to organize was heavily contested. Boston put that conflict in the spotlight.
One more detail that people often miss. The Boston police strike happened before modern public sector labour laws were fully developed. The legal framework we're used to today did not yet exist in the same way. So officials were improvising, and the result was a very harsh response.
That legal context matters a lot. The early 20th century was a time when the rules around collective bargaining for government workers were still evolving. The Boston strike helped set boundaries by showing what many leaders were unwilling to tolerate.
So if we're wrapping it up in one sentence, the Boston police strike was a 1919 labour revolt by underpaid officers that triggered disorder, helped make Calvin Coolidge a national figure, and became a lasting symbol of the limits of police union power in American public life.
And maybe the broader lesson is this. Even events that last only a few days can reshape politics, labor policy, and public memory for generations. Boston in 1919 is a perfect example of history moving fast and leaving a very long shadow. And now a word from our sponsor, Fyrebox. That's Fyrebox, the easiest way to create quizzes that grow your audience. Whether you're a marketer chasing leads, a teacher building assessments, or a creator who wants more engaged subscribers, Fyrebox lets you launch a conversion-ready quiz in minutes. No code, no designers, no waiting. Try it free at fyrebox.com. Welcome back. You just heard the story. Now let's see what stuck. Coming up, a few quick questions straight from what we just covered. 4 options each. I'll give you a few seconds to think before each answer. Ready? Here we go. Question 1. In what year did the Boston police strike take place? A. 1917, B. 1919, C. 1921, D. 1923. The correct answer is B. 1919. Question 2. What immediate issue helped lead Boston police officers to strike? A. A dispute over military deployment. B. Low pay, long hours, and rising living costs. C. A vote to eliminate the police department. D. A shortage of police uniforms. The correct answer is B. Low pay, long hours, and rising living costs. Question 3. Who was the Massachusetts governor who became nationally famous for his response to the strike? A. Edwin Upton Curtis, B. Warren G. Harding, C. Calvin Coolidge, D. Herbert Hoover. The correct answer is C. Calvin Coolidge. Question 4. What did Governor Coolidge do to help restore order during the strike? A. He negotiated directly with the strikers and approved their union. B. He ordered the city to close all businesses for a week. C. He called out the state militia and replaced striking officers with new recruits. D. He asked Congress to pass a new labor law immediately. The correct answer is C. He called out the state militia and replaced striking officers with new recruits. Question 5. What was the main outcome for most of the striking Boston police officers? A. They received large raises and returned to work. B. They were fired and were not allowed to return to their jobs. C. They were promoted for organizing successfully. D. They moved to another city and kept their pensions. The correct answer is B. They were fired and were not allowed to return to their jobs. That's a wrap on this one. Thanks for sticking with us all the way through, quiz and all. If you liked it, hit subscribe so the next episode lands automatically. I'm Cyril, this was the Quiz Fix, and we'll be back soon with another true story worth knowing.